They said the mare was unrideable, said the girl didn't speak. One kicked a man into a ditch. The other hadn't said a word in 5 years, but when 15-year-old Marae stepped into the corral, barefoot and silent, the wildfire-scarred horse didn't run, didn't rear, didn't flinch. She listened, and the moment the girl touched her, the dust beneath them curled into a perfect spiral, pressed, not drawn. No commands, no reins, just rhythm. What followed wasn't training, it was recognition. And the world would never be the same after Spiral 247. They called her Tempest, the mare. 14 hands high, coat like rusted dusk, eyes that had never blinked first. She came from a wildfire zone 2 counties over, rescued after a blaze they said moved too fast for anything to survive. No brand, no halter, just a thick white scar across her right flank and the habit of flinching at anything that sounded like thunder. She arrived angry, unrideable. 3 tried. 1 landed in a ditch, another in the hospital. The third walked away without a word, never returned. No one blamed the horse. No one blamed the fire. Some things, they said, were just too burned to break. Then came the girl. She had no name anyone remembered, only a file from the foster system that said, Marae, selective mutism, age 15, no known family, withdrawn. She hadn't spoken since she was 10. No trauma report, no official cause, just a line that someone had scribbled into the intake form in red pen. It's like she's listening to something no one else can hear. The ranch took her in because no one else would. She was quiet, polite, kept to herself. Until the morning she saw the mare, didn't ask, didn't wait, just walked straight into the corral while the wranglers were still arguing about whether to try again. The mare watched her, ears flat, muscles coiled, but she didn't charge, didn't rear, didn't buck. Marae walked slowly, boots scuffed, hands empty. She placed one palm on the mare's shoulder and closed her eyes. The wind picked up. Not sharp, not loud, curled. A spiral danced in the dust at their feet. And without a word the girl climbed on. She didn't use a saddle, didn't use a bridle, didn't whisper soothing words. She couldn't. Marae just moved with the mare, like a second breath, like a note the horse had been waiting to hear. Tempest shifted once beneath her, muscles tensing like coiled rope, every instinct ready to buck, to run, to fight like she always had. But she didn't. She settled. A full-body exhale rippled through her from withers to tail, and the girl sat there, back straight, hands loose, silent. The wranglers didn't speak. No one moved. No one dared. They'd never seen Tempest still that long. Not without ropes, not without sedation, not without fear pulsing beneath her hide. The spiral in the dust shimmered again. Eli, visiting the ranch on invitation from the director who'd started logging behavioral anomalies after Spiral 240, stepped quietly to the rail. He saw it. Not just the girl, not just the mare. The spiral forming beneath them. It wasn't carved. It wasn't chalk. It was pressed by rhythm, by breath, by the presence of 2 beings who had spent too long being misunderstood and had for a single moment found the echo of themselves in one another. The journal in his coat warmed. He opened it slowly. The ink wrote without waiting. Spiral 247. Fire-held stillness. Bearers, MT, Marae Tempest. Medium, animal, silence. Activation, shared trauma resonance. Phenomenon, spiral formed through postural synchronicity. Shape, wide base, narrow turn, open tip. Emotional signature, contained fear transmuted into mutual safety. Tess, who arrived later that day, said nothing. She stood beside the spiral, traced it in the dirt with one finger, and whispered, "She carries it in her chest." Jonah, looking at the shape, said, "No, she breathes it." Later, in the barn, Marae drew the spiral in charcoal on the wall of stall 3, Tempest's stall. She didn't label it, didn't sign her name, But beneath the spiral, she pressed her palm into the wood, and when she stepped away, the print glowed faintly for a breath, then faded. The mare and the girl rode every morning after that, not far, just to the edge of the property line and back. No reins, no commands, just movement threaded by something wordless, something older than instruction. When they rode, the wind quieted. Birds didn't startle. Even the other horses watched with still ears, like they were listening to a song only animals could hear. The wranglers stopped trying to figure it out. They started watching from a distance. Some of them brought chairs. One began to sketch. Not the girl, not the mare. The space between them. He showed the drawing to Mare one afternoon. It looked like two figures curved around each other, almost touching, never colliding. In the center, faint but unmistakable, a spiral. Marae stared at it a long time, then took a piece of chalk and traced the spiral again on stall 3's door, over the one she'd drawn before, now faded. This time she made it tighter, more deliberate, with one small opening at the end, like a breath drawn in, not out. That night, the spiral on the barn wall glowed, and the journal, resting on the loft shelf above the hayloft, opened without a hand. The entry wrote itself, Spiral 248, Spiral of Returned Breath, Medium, Animal-Human Resonance, Bearer, MT, Pattern, Inhale-Shaped, Transmission, Movement, Empathy, Muted Voice, Emotional Signature, Stillness that allows sound to rest. Jonah marked it on the atlas as a new type, quiet spirals, not passive, not invisible, crucial, the type that doesn't break silence but transforms it into communion. Leah shared the entry at the next Spiral Day gathering in the city. People didn't know what to say, so they didn't. They just sat with it. And for the first time, a spiral bloomed beneath a circle of chairs, one line shared among a dozen hearts. Each curve was shaped by someone's presence, not by their words. The spiral wasn't drawn, it settled. Later, a woman approached Leah and said, "I've never spoken about what I carry, but I think the spiral already has." The man who carved spirals into ice lived alone at the edge of a lake that didn't thaw until late spring. Locals called him Thayer. No one knew his first name. No one asked. He didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because he'd once said too much and lost everything. At least, that's what the town whispered. Some said he'd been a preacher, others a cartographer. The truth didn't matter much. What mattered were the spirals. He carved them every morning just before dawn, bare-handed, bare-breathed, kneeling on the ice with a chisel made from a deer antler, and patience. Some spirals were wide, others barely curved, all of them melted by midday. He never preserved them. He never looked back at them. He just carved. And every now and then, someone would come sit at the edge of the lake, not to talk, but to watch. And when they left, something inside them had shifted. One winter, Nomi came. 12 now. Taller. Quieter. She sat at the lakeside and watched Thayer carve. No one introduced them. They didn't need to. After the 7th day, she handed him a folded slip of paper with a spiral drawn in a single stroke. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just placed it in the snow beside him and carved something new. A spiral with 5 turns and a notch at the edge. Nomi gasped softly. It matched the one she'd once seen in a dream. When she returned home, she sent a letter to Jonah. Spiral 249, the Ice Whisper Spiral, bearer, Thayer, no surname. Witness, NT, medium, ice, isolation, watchful company. Status, melts daily, recurs nightly. Echotype, nonverbal restoration. Jonah added a new category to the atlas that night, spirals of disappearance. Those that didn't remain, but didn't need to, those that healed by vanishing. Tess, reading the update, said, "Maybe not all spirals are meant to be carried." Eli, sipping tea on the porch, answered, Some just want to be seen once, then let go. That winter the lake thawed later than usual, and when it did, there were no carvings left. But the ice reflected light in strange patterns, spiraled ones. The girl who learned spirals from water lived in a river town with no name. It had one once, but the sign had rusted through, and the locals stopped fixing it. They said names didn't stick there. Too many floods. Too much memory washing downstream. She was 7 when she saw her first spiral, not in chalk, not in stone, in the way the creek swirled around the cattails at the bend behind her house. It formed, unformed, then curled again, always clockwise, always 3 loops, and always after her mother wept. She didn't tell anyone, not because she was hiding it, because it felt personal, like the river was talking to her. Each time her mother cried, the spiral appeared. Each time her mother laughed, it disappeared. So the girl began to whisper things to the water, wishes, secrets, names of people she hadn't met but had dreamed about. And the spiral listened. Sometimes it spun faster, sometimes slower. Once it paused completely, stilled as glass. That was the day her father left. The river didn't spiral for 3 weeks after that, until she sang, a lullaby, half remembered, half made up. The spiral returned the next morning, and beside it, pressed into the riverbank, was a single fern leaf curled into the shape of a listening ear. She smiled, and drew her first spiral with a stick in the mud beside it. It held. That afternoon, a woman came up the path from the old barn. Tess. She knelt beside the girl and asked, "What's its name?" The girl didn't answer, but she placed her hand on the ground and whispered to the spiral. It shimmered. Tess nodded. "That's enough." She added the entry that night. Spiral 250, the river listener. Bearer, unnamed. Female, approximately age 7. Medium, moving water, emotional tether. Activation, vocal tone plus observed emotion. Memory signature, responsive joy. Grief, echo. Pattern, 3 loops, clockwise, reactive. Atlas classification, whisper spiral. Jonah read the entry, then said aloud, "We've passed 250. Leia replied, "We passed permanence long before that." The elder who drew spirals in salt lived on the edge of forgetting. Her name was Alma, 89, and every year she lost something: keys, recipes, the names of flowers, the sound of her sister's laugh. But she never forgot the spiral. It came to her in the early mornings, before the world was fully awake. She'd pour a small mound of salt onto her kitchen table, smooth it with her palm, and begin to draw. Always slow, always clockwise, always with her ring finger. The spiral didn't restore what was lost, but when she finished, something inside her settled. The ache behind her eyes dulled. Her hands stopped shaking. She could remember the smell of the sea from when she was 9. The sound of the bell her mother used to ring for supper. The exact way her late husband used to smile with only one side of his mouth. She couldn't recall his name, but the spiral helped her feel him. That was enough. One day a nurse walked in mid-drawing. She didn't say anything, just watched. When Alma finished, the nurse stepped forward and asked, "What is it?" Alma smiled. "It's what I can still hold." The nurse wrote a letter to the Joy Line. Jonah read it aloud that night. Then added the entry, Spiral 251, Salt Spiral of Soft Remembrance. Bearer, Alma. V. Medium, Salt, Muscle Memory, Ritual, Effect, Emotional Tethering. Pattern, Counterclockwise Variant on Even Days. Witness, C.E., Caregiver. Tess visited the next month, sat with Alma at her table, didn't speak, just poured salt and mirrored her spiral. Alma leaned close and said, "Some memories live under the others. You don't dig for them, you coax them." The spiral glowed faintly in the morning light. A new category was added to the atlas, coaxing spirals, spirals that do not demand to be remembered. They invite it, gently, patiently. Sometimes not for the bearer, but for someone watching nearby. Jonah added a note beneath the classification. Some spirals exist only to make forgetting kinder. They called it the spiral of self-forgiveness. It never formed in public, never appeared at spiral days or community fields or beneath barn beams lined with history. This spiral showed itself only in private moments, when no one was looking, especially the bearer. The first known sighting came from a woman named Bria, who wrote the joy line not with certainty but with wonder. I was washing the mirror. I just said out loud, "You did the best you could." I meant it, and for the first time I believed it. When I looked down, the condensation on the edge of the glass had formed a spiral. Just one, small, open at the end. Jonah read the letter in the barn, didn't speak for a while, then wrote, Spiral 252, the spiral that lets go, bearer BS, medium, vapor, reflection, trigger, verbalized forgiveness, self-directed, echo type, vapor-bound, field class, solo spiral, unwitnessed but registered. Tess called it a threshold spiral, a mark that didn't linger, didn't want to be archived, one that formed not because someone was remembering pain, but because they had finally stopped blaming themselves for carrying it. Others followed, one in a glove box mirror, one on a rain-speckled bus window, one in the corner of a journal next to the line, "You didn't ruin it, you were surviving it." These spirals were not strong in presence, but their impact ran deep, because to forgive yourself in silence is to whisper a new shape into the spiral, one that loops not inward, not outward, but upward. A new fieldbook page began. Coaxing spiral subtype, threshold spirals. Function, release through internal absolution. Result, detected presence of weight shift in space. Subject reports emotional lightness. Lasting time, 90 seconds to permanent, depending on belief level. And on the back of that same page, a note appeared. No one wrote it, but everyone read it. This spiral will only ever form when no one is watching. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is forgive yourself with no audience. The next threshold spiral appeared in a hospital waiting room. A man sat alone in a corner chair, clutching a photo of someone whose name he hadn't spoken in 22 years. Not since the falling out. Not since the slammed door. Not since the funeral he didn't attend. He was there for tests. Routine. He wasn't scared of the results. He was scared of feeling nothing. But something shifted that day. Not because of a phone call, not because of a doctor. Because he looked down at the photo and whispered, "You were right, just that." And then, the spiral formed in the condensation on his water bottle. Not elaborate, just a single, simple curl. He didn't see it at first, but a nurse did. She was on break, walking past, and when she looked down, it shimmered. Just for a second. Long enough to be believed. Later, she wrote it into her notebook and sent it to the Atlas. Jonah received the report and titled it, Spiral 253, the spiral that unclenched. Bearer, unknown. Witness, AG, nurse. Medium, condensation. Trigger, quiet confession without audience. Field class, passive echo spiral. Subtype, threshold. Underneath, he added a note in his own handwriting. Some spirals don't need to be heard. They just need to know you were finally willing to say it. That spiral faded in minutes. But the man, he walked out lighter. Didn't tell anyone what had changed. Just smiled when the receptionist said, "Hope we see you again, Mr. Hale." He hadn't given them his name. Not that name, but it felt right. So he said, "Yeah, me too." The woman who found spirals in her poetry never meant to be read. Her name was Solene. She lived in a second-floor apartment above a hardware store that closed before sunset. Most days she wore a cardigan too big for her and wrote in the margins of books instead of notebooks, old paperbacks from flea markets, thrift stores, library donation bins. She never read the full stories, just flipped to random pages and added her own. Spirals at first, then lines, then half-lines, like, "If no one ever sees this, is it more honest? Today I let go of a name I never said out loud." Laughter echoes longer in small rooms. She tucked the books back onto bus benches, into laundromats, under chairs in quiet cafes. She didn't expect anyone to find them. That wasn't the point. But people did. And the spirals? They started appearing. First in the cafe, where she always left the worn green copy of Wuthering Heights. Someone found it, read her note scribbled beside a scene she hadn't understood, and felt something unwind inside them. A barista found a spiral in the steam of their milk pitcher later that day. It curled once, vanished, and left behind the scent of chamomile, though they'd been making espresso, then in the laundromat. A teenager pulled a book from a forgotten bin, saw a line about a name that had been too heavy to carry, and wept quietly into a hoodie sleeve. A spiral of lint appeared on the dryer door. Too perfect to be random. Jonah received reports from all over the city, each referencing strange spirals showing up after a person found a book and read a single poetic line that wasn't theirs, but somehow fit. He followed the trail. All of it led back to Solene. He found her watering her windowsill plants, wearing headphones, humming a tune that didn't seem to have a melody. He asked, "Do you know what you're doing?" She looked up, eyes soft. "No, but it's working, isn't it?" He smiled and wrote, "Spiral 254, the spiral of unseen poetry." Bearer, Solene Vi. Medium, found text. Emotional reflection. Trigger, resonance through unsent expression. Echo type, page carried. Atlas class, quiet spiral. Passive transformative. Tess read the entry and added her own margin note. This spiral doesn't echo, it absorbs. And across the city, another book opened. Another spiral formed, not in chalk, not in light, in meaning. The first neighborhood to spiral without planning started with a grocery receipt. Someone had scribbled on the back of it, "You were kind, I noticed." They tucked it under a windshield wiper in the corner lot behind the flower shop. The next day another appeared. "I remember your laugh from 3 winters ago," taped to a lamppost. Then, "It wasn't your fault." Scratched into the fog of a cafe window. None were signed. All were curved slightly, bent into the beginnings of a spiral. People noticed. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a slow unfurling like warmth in early spring. Someone started a board in the laundromat titled, "What the Spiral Gave Back." Pieces of paper, grocery lists, receipts, wrappers, all with notes, all with kindnesses, too specific to be random. No one claimed authorship. No one needed to. A pattern formed. Spirals in sidewalk salt. Spirals in shoe prints on rainy days. Spirals in how the cafe lines curved, even when unintentional. Jonah got word when 3 separate people in unrelated cities reported dreams of a street shaped like a spiral, with notes pinned to every door. Leah dubbed it the spiral neighborhood phenomenon. He documented it as Spiral 255, collective spiral consciousness. Medium, anonymous kindness. Trigger, unacknowledged gratitude. Effect, physical spiral formations in communal patterns. Atlas, tag, urban belonging spiral, unauthored, unbroken. Tess added a margin note. Spirals don't always speak from one voice. Sometimes they hum from many hands. The neighborhood gained no fame, no articles, no documentaries. But the kindness continued, because people, without knowing why, kept leaving small truths behind. And the spiral? It kept them safe, like a shared breath stretched across sidewalks, like a memory written in chalk that didn't care who read it, only that someone did. The town was called Winsome, though no one remembered why. Not the elderly men who played chess under the rusting gazebo, not the florist who trimmed petals like prayers, not even the librarian who knew more about other people's memories than her own. Winsome had faded slowly, like ink in sun. Businesses had closed one by one. The post office stopped delivering on Thursdays. The local radio station went quiet after the tower collapsed in a windstorm no one saw coming. It wasn't abandoned. It was unspoken, until the spirals came. They started with the bench outside the library, a small one, drawn in chalk, soft gray lines looped with care. The next morning, a child left a note beside it. "You made me love stories again." Nobody claimed it. The librarian found it, pressed it in a book, and shelved it under W for Wandered In. 2 days later, a spiral showed up behind the bakery, drawn in flour. Next to it, "You remembered my name when I couldn't say it." A teenager found that one. She wrote it on her shoe with a Sharpie. By week's end, spirals curved into the cracks of sidewalks, carved softly into frost on windshields, formed in laundry lines that drooped with rhythm. Each one was met with something kind, a note, a ribbon, a whisper spoken loud enough for a stranger to hear and smile. Tess arrived by the second month, having followed the quiet trail left behind by a school teacher who'd been mailing spiral shapes cut from construction paper to the Joyline Atlas since April. She walked through town and didn't ask a single question. She just left a bench, wide, facing nothing, no plaque, just one word carved into its side: stay. Jonah logged it as Spiral 256, Town of Kind Echoes. Location, Winsome Reactivation Site. Carrier, communal/unknown. Effect, civic memory restoration, spiral pattern, resurgence through anonymous kindness. Status, blooming. And on the wind, as Tess departed, someone whispered, "You gave us a name worth remembering again." The child who mapped spirals by smell was named Avi, 7 years old. Couldn't read yet, not really, not the way other kids did. Letters danced too much. Pages felt like puzzles, missing edges. But Avi could smell a memory better than anyone. He said joy smelled like mint and old books. Sorrow, like copper pennies left in the sun. He didn't know what grief meant, but he could trace it in dust. He arrived at Winsome with his grandmother, who had once drawn spirals in sea salt and forgotten why. They came looking for quiet. Instead, they found belonging. The first time Avi noticed it, they were walking past the old gazebo, and he stopped. "Something happened here," he said. "What do you smell?" his grandmother asked. He tilted his head. "Lemons." And crying, but happy crying. She didn't ask more. They returned the next day, and the next. By the end of the week, Avi carried a notebook, not filled with drawings or words, scents. Each page labeled in his scrawl, bench by bakery, chalk, blueberry, maybe dancing, library wall, ink, cinnamon, someone forgave someone here, alley behind grocery, soap, burned toast, loneliness that got hugged. He didn't need spirals to see where the joy had settled. He smelled them. Jonah received a package from Winsome a month later. Inside, Avi's notebook, and a note written by his grandmother. He says the spirals are songs that don't need music. He's tracking them by what they leave behind. Jonah logged it. Spiral 257, Spiral of Residual Joy. Bearer, Avi H. Medium, scent-based recognition. Phenomenon, memory trace embedded in olfactory signature. Classification, sensory spiral, non-visual. Tess read the entry and smiled. "I always knew memory had a smell." Avi added one last page before the notebook was sent. "Spiral in my pillow smells like Dad's shirt. I think that means I still love him." Avi's spiral map kept growing, even after the notebook was mailed away. He didn't stop cataloging the smells. He just shifted mediums. At first he used stones, flat ones smooth and wide enough to scratch a spiral into with a paperclip or a nail. He'd draw the spiral on the front, then write a word on the back, a smell, a feeling, sometimes both. Vanilla, missing someone you haven't met yet. Rain, the apology no one made but everyone felt. Dust, remembering your name again. The townspeople started collecting them, without asking, without questioning. They left their own behind. Soon, a whole section of Winsome's Park had become what people called the Spiral Grove. A field of smooth stones, each one pressed into the dirt in loose spirals, with words so specific and strange they made people laugh, cry, or go quiet. Jonah visited that fall. He knelt beside one of Avi's early stones. Peaches, Mom's laugh underwater. He didn't need to understand it. He felt it. He wrote the entry that night, Spiral 258, Grove of Scent Stones, bearer A.H., witnesses many, medium, smell to memory, symbolic encoding. Classification, olfactory spiral, tactile variant. Effect, emotional disarmament, high correlation with laughter through tears. Tess added a note in the archive. This spiral doesn't spiral for the eyes, it spirals for the senses that linger. And Leah sent Avi a package, a new notebook, this one with spiral-bound edges, and a message tucked into the front pocket. When words don't make sense, your spirals always do. The first spiral that tasted like honey appeared in a bakery that hadn't been open in years. It was in a town no one talked about unless they were lost. One of those places where the roads led inward but never through, where GPS signals flickered and time stretched a little thin in the afternoons. A man named Elias found it. He wasn't looking for anything, just wandering. He'd been driving for 2 days after his father's funeral, taking turns without thinking, following road signs like breath. He stopped when he smelled something warm, sweet, familiar, not nostalgia, recognition. The bakery door was half open, dust thick in the corners, sunlight slanting across the counter. No one was inside. But on the display case, written in syrup across a plate of shattered glass, was a spiral. Tight, 5 loops, tapered at the edge. He reached for it without meaning to. And the moment his finger touched the dried sugar, he tasted it. Laughter in a childhood kitchen. Bittersweet apologies, love that never learned to say its name. The way his mother used to hum without melody. And honey, always honey. He sank to the floor and wept, not in grief, in arrival. The spiral had waited there. For him. The journal back at the archive flipped open. Jonah logged the report within an hour of receiving Elias's message. Spiral 259. Taste spiral. Honey glass variant. Bearer ED. Medium. Flavor. Memory. Cascade. Pattern. 5-loop inward taper. Atlas. Classification. Sensory spiral. Gustatory class. Effect. Emotional integration through taste. Tess read the report, then whispered, Of course, memory has a flavor. Elias left the bakery door open, didn't clean the spiral, didn't take a photo. He simply left a note on the counter. If this is for you, you'll know. If it isn't, may your memory still sweeten something inside you. And then he walked out. A spiral of powdered sugar formed in his footsteps as he left. Gone by morning, but never lost. The kiss that birthed a spiral happened on a Tuesday. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. It was 2 men, Callan and Reed, standing in the shade behind the community center after folding 73 plastic chairs and sweeping cookie crumbs from the linoleum floor. They hadn't spoken about it. Not once, not in 32 years, but they had always stayed close, always sat next to each other at town meetings, always nodded like they understood something unspoken. The spiral had followed them for decades, in the shape of how their paths always curved toward each other. in the way Reed kept the bench clean where Callan liked to eat lunch, in how Callan always left 2 chairs open on the porch during thunderstorms. That Tuesday, Reed picked up the last chair, turned around, and finally said, "Do you still remember the last time?" Callan didn't answer. He just stepped forward and kissed him, gently, certain. The spiral appeared in the dust at their feet, not drawn, not etched, pressed by the weight they'd finally set down. Jonah logged it the next day after someone from the community sent in a Polaroid of the faint curve in the gravel and a note that read, "They never asked for a blessing, but the spiral gave one anyway." Spiral Tutor 60, Spiral of Long-Held Yes. Bearers, CR. Medium, Physical Touch. Release of Restrained Truth. Echo, Type. Affectionate Realization Spiral. Effect, Joy through Relinquished Silence. Atlas, Tag, Touch Spiral. Latent Activation. Tess marked it with a blue thread in the Barnes map. Nomi read it and wrote beneath, "This spiral didn't forgive, it welcomed." And in the next town over, a man who hadn't held his wife's hand since 1998 reached across the truck cab at a red light and did just that. No spiral appeared visibly, but he felt it, curling softly through the space between them. The first touch spiral to appear without contact happened in a hospital room filled with machines and beeping and breath that came and went like the tide. A woman sat beside her sister, hand hovering inches from the edge of the blanket. She hadn't touched her in months, not since the argument, not since the words neither of them meant carved silence between them like a canyon. The sister couldn't speak now, could barely move, but her eyes were open, and they watched her, soft, unafraid, waiting. The woman reached forward, paused. She whispered, "If I touch you, I don't want to break what's left." She never made contact, but she cried. The spiral formed between them in the folds of the blanket, shaped by breath, grief, and wanting to be forgiven without knowing how. A nurse came in hours later and felt it. She didn't see it, but she changed the sheets more gently than usual. And later she told someone, "There was something warm in that room that didn't come from the sun." Jonah logged it. Spiral 261, the almost spiral. Bearer, JL. Witness, none. Medium, unmade touch. Activation, intention toward healing. Echo type, near spiral, gravitational spiral. Effect, presence-laden air, lingering warmth, mutual release. Atlas, classification, incomplete but entire. Leah added a note in the archive. This spiral doesn't need to close. It exists in the act of almost, and that sometimes is enough. Later the sister recovered, not suddenly, not dramatically, but she opened her eyes and smiled. And the first thing she said was, "Thank you for staying close." That night, a new touch spiral formed in a train station where 2 ex-friends passed each other and said nothing. But they turned around at the same time and nodded. They called them near spirals, whispers of spirals really, faint curves that never fully looped, shapes that appeared only in the space between intention and action. You couldn't track them like the others, couldn't pin them to a map or preserve them in chalk. They weren't meant to be remembered by sight. They were meant to be felt. The first formal entry came from a teacher named Milo. He'd stood in front of a classroom full of students and said, "I was wrong," for the first time in his career. No grand apology. Just those 3 words, offered plainly after grading too harshly, speaking too quickly, assuming too much. He felt something shift in the air. Later, a student left a note on his desk. "When you said that, it felt like something let go of my chest." No spiral was drawn. But when Milo stepped outside to collect himself, the wind curled a leaf at his feet into a shape he couldn't ignore. Almost a spiral, close enough to mean something, not enough to last. He sent his story to the Atlas, unsure if it counted. Jonah logged it anyway. Spiral 262, the spiral that almost was. Witness MD, trigger, unarmed truth. Medium, atmospheric resonance. Classification, near spiral, half-loop recognition. Effect, decompression in shared space. Post-event clarity. Comment, it doesn't mark, it mends. Tess marked it in the archive with a soft gray thread. Leah added it to the digital index under the heading Spirals That Don't Want Attention. And Nomi, now 13 and quietly revered by spiral watchers around the world, drew one on the back of her hand, not closed, not perfect, just enough. She wrote beside it, I forgive me. No one saw it. No one needed to. But that night the spiral on the barn floor unfurled half an inch wider. Not because it needed to, because it could. There was a town where no spirals had ever been recorded, no chalk curves on sidewalks, no whispered shapes in glass or leaves or riverbeds, nothing logged in the Joy Line Atlas. It wasn't because the people didn't know, they did. In fact, they knew spirals better than most. They just didn't need to draw them. Because in that town called Quiet Bend, everyone already listened. Arguments ended in pauses, not explosions. Apologies were spoken without ceremony. Silence was treated like presence, not absence. And joy, it wasn't loud. It was woven into shared meals, into door-holding and nods across parking lots, into the habit of asking, do you have enough? And meaning it. Jonah visited once, sat on the town's one bench, watched as a child offered a cookie to a woman who'd just finished crying, watched the woman accept it, eat half, then hand back the rest. They didn't speak, but the spiral appeared in the dust by their feet, not drawn, pressed. Jonah bent down, touched the edge of the shape. It wasn't warm. It wasn't glowing. It was steady. Later, when he opened the journal, he hesitated and then wrote, Spiral 263, the spiral that didn't need a witness. Location, Quiet Bend. Trigger, mutual grace. Medium, unmarked kindness. Echo, type, endemic spiral. Effect, sustained communal ease. No disturbance necessary. Note, this spiral did not spiral to be seen, it spiraled to stay. Tess wrote in the margin, maybe spirals don't begin where something breaks. Maybe they begin where nothing had to. And when Jonah left Quiet Bend, he didn't mark it on the map. He left it blank, a quiet circle, untouched, but understood. Not every town needs a spiral, but sometimes a town becomes one. The first time it happened, no one noticed. There were no markings, no letters, no dreams sent across counties, just a place where grief didn't echo because it had already been spoken, where joy didn't surprise because it was welcomed, where silence didn't scare people and no one mistook quiet for distance. They didn't have a word for it, but the Atlas did. Jonah logged it carefully, reverently. Spiral 264, the lived spiral. Location, withheld by request. Type, ambient integration. Pattern, non-visual, non-verbal, non-symbolic. Effect, whole community resonance without disruption. Bearer, shared. Status, self-sustaining. Tess stared at the entry for a long time, then wrote only this. The spiral does not always arrive. Sometimes it grows up with you. Leah archived it in a new category. Spirals that don't need to begin. She said, we spent years listening for when it forms. Now we're listening for where it already is. And Nomi, now nearly 14, sketched a spiral with no center. Just rings, faint, fading as they widened. She titled it, The Spiral That Never Had to Say Hello. And that night, as the wind moved through the orchard behind the barn, no spiral appeared. None needed to. But the trees bent slightly toward each other in the dark, and stayed that way. After that first ride, no one tried to saddle Tempest again. They didn't need to. Mare rode without tools, without tension. She never asked, never took. She moved the way silence does when it feels safe, with permission, not pressure. Each morning, just before the mist burned off the paddocks, Marae would walk into the pasture barefoot. Tempest would meet her halfway, breath steaming from her nostrils, ears high but calm. They'd ride, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. No one knew where they went, only that when they returned, the air around them was different, lighter. The ranch stopped watching, started listening, and that's when the spirals began to show up, not in the soil, not in chalk or dust or leaves, in rhythm, in how the barn doors swayed and never slammed, in how the horses blinked in patterns that matched Marae's breathing, in how the light curled through the rafters when she sat alone in stall 3, eyes closed, fingers tracing circles on the wood like she was remembering something her body never forgot. Tess came one afternoon, watched from a distance, said nothing. After the ride, she handed Marae a smooth piece of stone with a spiral carved into its surface. It wasn't perfect, uneven in places, carved with a hand that had been grieving when it held the chisel. Marae turned it over in her palm, then nodded and smiled, not wide, not loud, just enough. The journal wrote that night, Spiral 265, Spiral of Soundless Trust. Bearer, Marae T. Medium, animal-human attunement, breath sync. Spiral type, nonverbal communicative spiral. Transmission, stillness, rhythm. Presence, echo effect, widened field, calm. Recorded reduced heart rates in observers. Atlas, class quiet spiral, companion resonance variant. Jonah read the entry aloud, then whispered, "She didn't tame the mare, she joined her spiral." The next day, Tempest let a second child ride. Only for a minute, only bareback, but the spiral in the paddock pulsed once. Marae was there, hand on her heart, eyes closed, listening to a silence that now sang. That fall, the horses started tracing spirals in the pasture. It wasn't trained, it wasn't random. They moved in slow, looping patterns, circling fence posts, water troughs, even each other, with a rhythm that mimicked the same breath pattern Marae and Tempest had created. It wasn't constant, only when the air felt right, still warm, listening. One morning, Jonah watched from the hill and whispered, "They're remembering something we never taught them." Marae didn't claim it. She never pointed to the spirals or tried to explain them. She simply sat at the edge of the paddock, fingers resting lightly on the grass, her body tuned like an instrument long left untouched, but suddenly in key again. The other horses responded, not by following her, but by mirroring her calm. And when she placed a hand on their flanks, they would still. Breathe, turn in a circle once, and rest. Tess recorded the phenomenon quietly. Spiral 266, the herd spiral. Bearers, multiple. Anchor, MT. Pattern, rotational presence, mimicry, medium. Muscle memory, trust resonance. Effect, species cross spiral formation without symbolic instruction. Atlas classification, instinct spiral, echoline. She added in the margins, this spiral doesn't form to be understood. It forms because it is felt. Word spread. Other barns tried to replicate it. None could, not because they lacked patience or intention, but because the spiral wasn't a trick. It was earned. One day, a boy with severe anxiety arrived at the ranch. Hadn't spoken in 6 months. Fidgeted constantly. Couldn't be near horses without panicking. Marae walked with him to the pasture. Said nothing. Tempest approached slowly, breathed against the boy's hand, then turned once, just once, in a soft spiral. The boy laughed. Small, nervous. But it rippled. The horses shifted. One circled. Another blinked twice, then lowered its head. The boy sat down in the dirt. Drew a spiral in the dust with his thumb. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Marae sat beside him, added a second spiral, wider. And together they watched the herd move like water made of memory. By winter, the pasture had become a map of spirals no one had drawn. Not symmetrical, not forced, just grown. Paths worn into the frost where hooves had traced soft loops again and again, some overlapping, some paused halfway through, like a thought half finished but deeply felt. From the air they looked like wind-blown sketches. From the ground they felt like presence. The ranch hands stopped sweeping the tracks, started marking them, each spiral given a name, not official, personal. The one where she rested. The one he walked 3 times before trusting. The one that only appears after snow. Marae walked them each morning, sometimes with Tempest, sometimes alone. No notebook, no camera, just her body and rhythm with the memory beneath her feet. Jonah returned with Leah that December. They didn't bring equipment. They brought tea, a blanket, and the latest edition of the Atlas. Heavy now, with stories too human to classify. They stood at the gate and watched the mare spiral through the snow, her movements slow and wide, deliberate as a song. Leah whispered, "This pasture is teaching us something we forgot." Jonah nodded, that not all spirals need to be spoken to be shared. Tess arrived a day later. She sat with Marae by the barn. Neither spoke. They watched the boy from before, the one who hadn't spoken, leading a small gelding in a quiet arc. As he walked, he hummed, not a song, a spiral, low and circular, each note folding into the next. Marae smiled, pulled a stone from her pocket, set it on the porch rail, carved into it, Spiral 267, Spiral of Carried Quiet. No page needed, no ink, just stone and snow and movement that meant something without asking for applause. That night, as the sky pressed soft against the ground, the pasture spiraled again. Not because anyone told it to, but because some truths, once lived, start repeating gently through the world until the world is ready to listen again. The sleepwalker left spirals behind him in the frost. Every morning his parents would find the trail, soft curves pressed into the frozen grass, 5 or 6 loops wide, always ending near the fence line where the orchard met the edge of the old woods. They thought it was an animal at first, then a prank. But the boy's socks were always damp, his soles faintly dirty. One morning they followed the prints and found him standing barefoot in the snow, eyes closed, humming something that made the trees go still. He didn't remember doing it, but he always felt better after, less restless, less heavy, like something that had been clinging to him in dreams had finally stepped off. They brought him to the ranch in spring. Marae met him at the gate. He didn't speak, but when he saw Tempest, he drew a spiral in the dirt with his toe. Perfect, open-ended. Marae drew another beside it, not the same shape, a mirror. And the boy smiled. That afternoon he slept in the loft above stall 3. When he woke, another spiral had formed in the dust beside his bed, not traced, walked. The horses had stirred during the night. Someone had heard their hooves, and the pattern was unmistakable. A small arc, repeated steps, a widening turn. The boy looked at it, then whispered his name, the first word he'd spoken in months. Tess logged it immediately. Spiral 268, the sleepwalker's spiral. Bearer, K. Medium, somnambulant resonance. Activation, dream state plus safe field. Echo type, movement-released memory. Effect, emotional untangling through unconscious gesture. Jonah added a margin note. Some spirals form when we are brave enough to rest in a place that holds us. That night 5 horses moved through the pasture in slow arcs. No one led them, no one watched. But in the morning, a spiral had formed around the boy's bedroll in the loft. Not as protection, as recognition. The first spiral that appeared in someone's shadow came without warning. It was late afternoon, long light stretching low across the western paddock, turning grass into gold and fence posts into soft geometry. Marae was sitting in the dirt, eyes closed, hands resting palm up in her lap. Tempest stood nearby, tail flicking slow, head lowered. The boy, Kay, was asleep in the loft above, wrapped in dreams and hay and steady breath. Jonah had just arrived, a fresh page in the field book ready for notes, when he saw it. A shadow. Marae's. It stretched across the field behind her, but it didn't fall straight. It curved. A perfect spiral, wide and slow and soft as a yawn. He blinked. Waited. It didn't change. Didn't move. Just stayed, still and obvious in a way that felt deliberate. He stepped closer, watched as Marae's breath deepened and the spiral in her shadow tightened, loop by loop. Not in fear, in focus. When she exhaled, it relaxed again. He didn't speak, didn't disturb it. That evening, he logged it. Spiral 269, the shadow spiral. Bearer, MT. Medium, cast shadow plus inner stillness. Trigger, centered awareness. Effect, spiral projected through silhouette. Relational grounding. Atlas, classification. Present spiral. Reflexive loop. Tess, upon reading the entry, added, "When the spiral shows up in your shadow, it means you've stopped running from it." The next week, 3 others reported similar events. One in a greenhouse, one on a lakeshore, one on the roof of a hospice center, where a woman held her mother's hand through the final breath and whispered, "You can rest now." Her shadow curved gently behind her, forming 2 spirals interwoven. No one saw them but the nurse at the door. She didn't say anything. She just placed her hand over her own chest and breathed with it. Later, she drew the shape on the wall above her desk, not for others to understand, just to remember that some spirals only appear once you've become part of them. The first reflection, spiral, was never seen in real time. It was discovered in a photograph. A mother had been taking pictures of her daughter beside the creek that bordered the far pasture. Tempest grazing in the background, the girl mid-laugh, arms out, like wings. Nothing strange about the moment, but when the photo was developed, the mother still used film, called it her small rebellion against forgetting, something appeared in the water behind the girl, not a ripple, not a leaf, a spiral, subtle, just beneath the surface. Not drawn, reflected. The creek had been still, the light soft. There had been nothing visible when she looked, but the spiral was there, caught in silver grain. The mother brought the photo to the ranch, hands trembling. "I didn't see it," she whispered, "but it saw us." Jonah studied the photo for hours, noticed the angle of the spiral, backward from how it would have appeared drawn, a mirror spiral, left-handed, reversed. He turned the page in the field book, wrote, "Spiral 270, reflection, spiral, reverse loop, medium, water-based light, echo, trigger, captured joy in motion, witness, camera, / delayed viewing, effect, spiral appears only when no one is looking." Tess added, "Not all spirals want to be felt in the moment. Some are shy, some speak best once we've left." Leah created a new classification, ghost joy spirals, spirals that live only in trace, in echo, in proof you didn't know you carried. The mother took the photo home, framed it, not for the spiral, for the girl, for the moment, but when the daughter looked at it, she said, "That's where it told me I was safe." The mother blinked. "What?" The girl pointed at the spiral, smiled. "Didn't you hear it? The boy who only saw spirals in reflections was named Orion. He was 13, soft-spoken, and rarely looked anyone in the eye, not out of fear, but because he said too much lived in people's faces. So he watched the world through windows, through puddles, through glass, and that's where the spirals found him. In the sheen of a storefront at dusk, he once saw a spiral form in the sky above his shoulder, even though the real sky remained still. He blinked, turned, saw nothing. But in the reflection, The spiral continued to widen, slowly, like breath exhaled by something enormous and kind. At first he thought it was a trick of the light. Then it happened again, in a silver mixing bowl during breakfast, in the glass face of a broken wristwatch, in the chrome of a bike handlebar just before it was stolen. Each time the spiral was different, some fast, tight, anxious, some long, uncoiling, restful. He began sketching them in a journal he kept in his hoodie pocket. Never from memory, only after checking the reflection 3 times as if to confirm, yes, this one wanted to be seen. His parents didn't understand. His teachers called it distraction. But when he sent a scanned page of his drawings to the Joyline email Leah managed, she stopped what she was doing and forwarded it to Jonah with the subject line, "We've got a mirror bearer." Jonah logged the entry the same day. Spiral 271, mirror spiral, echo lens variant. Bearer, Orion M. Medium, reflective surfaces, light memory. Activation, nonverbal observation. Effect, spiral forms only in mirrored reality, never in present physical field. Classification, refracted spiral, passive witness class. Tess added, "He sees what the spiral isn't ready to say out loud." Orion kept drawing, filled 1 journal, then 2, then started leaving his sketches on park benches, under windshield wipers, inside library books, never signed, always dated, and always titled, "What the Spiral Tried to Show You When You Weren't Looking." The first time a spiral appeared in a reflection, but not to the person casting it, it changed everything. It happened in a train window. A woman named Harper was sitting across from a man in a brown coat mid-commute, neither speaking. The window beside him showed the blur of passing trees, soft and rhythmic. But Harper wasn't looking outside. She was looking at the window, more specifically at his reflection. And in that reflection, a spiral, clear, delicate, spinning slowly just behind his shoulder. She blinked. It stayed. She turned to glance over his shoulder. Nothing. No movement, no shape, just coat and collar and stillness. She looked back at the window. The spiral still there, moving with him, like a memory coiled into shadow. She didn't speak to him, but she took out her phone, photographed the window just once. When she looked at it later, the spiral wasn't in the picture, but the feeling was. She wrote to the Joyline that night. Her message was short. "I don't know who he was, but the spiral followed his reflection. And I think it wasn't meant for him. I think it was meant for someone watching him be seen." Jonah added it to the atlas. Spiral 272, witness spiral. 3rd gaze class. Bearer, unknown. Witness, HE. Medium, reflective, passive alignment. Trigger, compassionate gaze from another. Effect, spiral appears in observer's field, not the subject's. Classification, mirror spiral. Indirect echo variant. Tess read the entry and circled the word gaze. She added, "Some spirals don't appear because you remembered. They appear because you held space for someone else to be remembered." Later that month, Orion found one, in a shop window, behind a man singing under his breath softly as he tied his daughter's shoelace. The man never saw it, but Orion did. He sketched it quickly, called it Spiral 273, Love Left Visible. The boy whose spiral never appeared until someone remembered him lived in the quietest house on the edge of town. His name was Milo, 12 years old, foster system. 3 homes in 2 years. No spiral, no signs, no notes on the windows. He came to the spiral registry on accident, brought along by a family who didn't stay, a temporary placement that turned into a permanent absence. The others saw spirals, drew them, dreamed them. Milo didn't. He watched, he listened. But he never saw the loops, never felt the pulsing air, never found a spiral tucked into his breakfast toast or folded into fog on the field. He told Jonah once, in a letter written with blocky, careful letters, "Maybe I don't have one. Maybe I'm just watching everyone else feel better." Jonah didn't write back right away, because he didn't know what to say. Until one day, Tess opened the barn and saw a new spiral drawn not in dust or chalk, but in sunlight streaking through the slats of the eastern wall. It wasn't shaped like the others. It wasn't spiraled from its own center. It was built from the edges in, gathered, like someone else had created it by remembering the shape. And on the floor where the light landed sat a small folded note. "I remember him. I remember how he held the door for everyone, how he left snacks on desks he thought were empty, how he smiled even when his name was forgotten. I remember Milo. He gave me kindness I didn't know how to ask for. No signature, just a spiral drawn in one corner." Jonah wrote the entry immediately. Spiral 274. The remembered spiral. Bearer, Milo R. Medium, memory of others, unwitnessed kindness. Trigger, accumulated compassion named aloud. Effect, spiral appears in shared space when acknowledgement crosses threshold. Atlas class, witness echo, shadow line spiral. Leah added, "Some spirals don't grow from what you carry. They grow from what you quietly give away." That night, in a new home, Milo found a book on his nightstand. No note. But inside the back cover, a small spiral had been drawn in blue ink, and beneath it, "This is yours now." Milo never asked who left the book. He didn't need to. He carried it with him everywhere, pressed to his chest, in crowded rooms, tucked under his pillow at night, laid carefully on the lunch table like a second plate. Not to show off, just to hold close. After the spiral appeared in sunlight, something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but meaningfully. He started seeing almost spirals, in the way birds lifted from fences in wide curves, in how leaves skated across the playground blacktop, in how laughter rippled in circles during recess, not at him, not away from him, but around him. And still, he didn't draw them. He noticed them. One afternoon he sat beside the garden at his new foster home, watching a snail trace its path along a wet stone. He didn't speak, but he reached into his book and placed the corner gently in the snail's path. It climbed over the paper, leaving a faint, glistening spiral. He stared at it for a long time. Then, for the first time, he smiled before anyone else did. He traced the mark with his finger. Didn't photograph it, didn't preserve it. Just turned the page and wrote, "I saw it today, and it saw me back." Jonah received the update a week later, tucked into an envelope postmarked "Without return," sent from the town that still didn't have a name on any Spiral Day map. He logged it carefully. Spiral 275, the gentle notice, spiral. Bearer, MR. Medium, biological pattern, a soft observation. Trigger, mutual presence with the unnoticed. Effect, low-frequency recognition resonance. Classification, quiet giver spiral, undrawn class. Tess read it, underlined it, and wrote in the margin, "This spiral doesn't ask to grow. It grows because someone finally saw what didn't need fixing." That spring, the garden outside Milo's window spiraled naturally, vines curling around each other, not in competition, but companionship. He didn't show anyone. But every morning, he left the window open, in case someone was listening. The girl who heard spirals and footsteps lived above a bakery. Every morning, the sound of people below woke her, not alarms, not birdsong, but the rhythm of feet, hard heels, slow shuffles, dancers disguised as deliverymen. The world passed by her window in beats and patterns, and she learned early on to listen not just for where people were going, but how. Her name was Wren. She was 16, mostly quiet, and rarely looked anyone in the eye. She wore headphones with no music and carried a notebook labeled, "I don't know yet." Inside, she didn't write poems. She mapped patterns, curves, loops, spirals, made from how people moved. The woman who walked her dog with a limp step pause, the kid on a scooter with one foot that dragged, the barista who danced more than she walked. Wren didn't know what the spirals meant, but she knew when they clicked. Sometimes she'd run outside after someone passed, stand where their footsteps had landed, and feel her ribs tighten in rhythm, like her body had just stepped into someone else's memory. The first time it changed her was during a rainstorm. An elderly man passed her window, his cane tapping a slow but deliberate rhythm into the soaked pavement. She leaned out, closed her eyes, and heard it, not just steps, a spiral in the way he walked, each tap curling slightly tighter than the last, until it resolved into silence beneath the awning of the cafe. She ran downstairs, saw it, just for a moment, in the puddle behind him, a spiral of water rippling outward from his path. She drew it in her notebook, wrote next to it, "He's been carrying something too long, but he's ready to let it go." That entry became Spiral 276. Jonah called it the Footfall Spiral, Bearer RL, Medium. Gait, Rhythmic Sequence, Rain Memory. Effect, Echo Spiral formed through repetitive motion with emotional anchor. Classification, Movement Spiral, Kinetic Echo Type. Tess underlined the word anchor and added, "Some spirals don't want to be drawn, they want to be walked." Wren kept listening. She never told anyone what she was hearing. But one day someone tapped her on the shoulder at Spiral Day and said, "I think you've been tracing mine." Wren smiled and said nothing, just pointed to the ground where they stood. The grass curled gently outward, like it had been listening too. Wren began to walk in spirals without realizing it. Not in obvious circles, not loops around buildings or lazy turns in parking lots, but in slow arcs that tightened as she moved, like her steps were tracing something beneath the sidewalk. She'd catch herself making half-turns on stairs, drifting toward corners, and away again in long, quiet sweeps. It wasn't habit, and it was tuning. She noticed that when she walked this way, curved instead of direct, people didn't bump into her as often. Conversations happened more gently. Even crowds felt less sharp. Her footsteps bent the world just slightly around her, like the spiral was making room for something else to move with her. So she leaned into it. She mapped a whole section of the city based not on streets but on spiral paths. Some spirals ran through plazas. Some ran between benches. One cut straight through the old bus depot, where dozens of commuters now walked slightly to the left or right without knowing why. She called them sway paths. And when she started placing little markers, chalk spirals, soft lines drawn in wax pencils, the world began to respond. People slowed down and they didn't stop. But they noticed. A woman looked down at her feet and said, "Huh, feels better this way." A courier rerouted their deliveries to follow the curves and later told a friend, "I get less tired when I take the spiral route." Jonah visited and walked the paths himself, then logged it. Spiral 277, the walked spiral. Bearer RL. Medium, body in motion mapping. Trigger, kinesthetic empathy. Effect, city path resonance, pedestrian flow shift. Classification, ambient spiral, motion field layer. Tess added a new term to the archive. Spiral geometry, emergent, when physical movement begins to replicate emotional memory without instruction. Wren never asked for acknowledgement, but someone left a note at the edge of her favorite spiral near the fountain. It said, "I used to walk like I didn't belong. Now the sidewalk sings when I pass." She added it to her notebook, and in the margin wrote, "Some spirals are walked into place until the world learns how to move again." The blind boy who learned to navigate spirals through sound alone was named Solon, 9 years old. Born without sight but with an uncanny sense of where things should be, not where they were, where they felt right. He could walk into any room and pause, tilt his head, whisper, "Something's off," And it was. A chair out of place. A piano slightly turned, a clock ticking in an uneven rhythm. He didn't call it a gift. He didn't call it anything. He just listened. And when he walked, the world listened back. His cane tapped in patterns, not straight, not random, curved, consistent. Echoes that returned differently depending on how the air felt, how people breathed nearby, how memory seemed to collect in corners. The first spiral came in the school hallway. He was walking alone, humming softly, tapping the cane against lockers. Tap, tap, swirl, pause. A teacher passing behind him stopped, looked down. Footprints in chalk. His own. Drawn in a wide, looping spiral across the waxed floor. He hadn't touched chalk. He hadn't known. But someone, something, had traced his rhythm behind him. When told, he just smiled and said, "I knew it sounded curved." Jonah traveled to meet him, sat with him in the gymnasium, surrounded by half-faded court lines and echo. Solon asked him to walk in a circle, slow. Jonah did. After one loop, Solon said, "You're not carrying it in your feet." Jonah stopped. "What am I carrying it in?" Solon smiled. "Your shoulders. They're heavier than your steps." That night, Jonah wrote, Spiral 278, Spiral of Echoed Orientation. Bearer, Solon M. Medium, sound, or spatial rhythm. Intuitive geometry. Trigger, perceptual alignment. Effect, spiral formation through rhythm-based awareness. Classification, spiral echo, non-visual anchor. Tess added, he doesn't need to see spirals. He walks in a way that helps the world remember where it forgot to listen. Solon began to map his town by tone. He carried a pocket recorder, labeled each curve by sound. One clip was titled, "Here, it sounds like someone remembering their father's voice." Another, "This street tastes like someone let go of something they didn't mean to hold." The spirals formed behind him, in moss, in dust, in warmth, but never for him, only for those finally ready to follow. The woman who never drew spirals, but left them behind in silence, was named Claire. She didn't speak much, didn't hum, didn't tap her fingers, didn't write in journals or draw in margins. But wherever she went, people paused, not because she demanded space, because she created it. She worked at the library in a town where the wind seemed to curl before it blew, and where dusk always lingered a minute longer than elsewhere. Claire shelved books like someone laying flowers at old graves, carefully, gently, like she was placing memory back where it belonged. No one knew her age. Some thought 30, others 70. Time folded differently around her. The first spiral appeared 3 days after she helped a boy find a book his mother used to read him before she passed. She hadn't said a word, just walked him to the shelf, placed the book in his hands, and gave the slightest nod. That night the boy's mother dreamed of a spiral pressed into the snow, glowing faintly, with the sound of pages turning beneath it. She drew it from memory the next morning, then found the same spiral, faint, perfect, curled into the dust of the library's reading room. Claire had passed through there an hour before. More followed. A spiral pressed into the shape of 2 chairs pulled close. Another formed in the condensation on the glass of the history room, after Claire held a woman's hand as she remembered the name of a brother she'd spent years trying not to forget. Jonah didn't interview her. He just walked beside her one day. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge him. But when he turned to leave, he felt lighter. And when he looked back, there was a spiral in the carpet where her shadow had been. He wrote it down that night. Spiral 279, the spiral of held quiet. Bearer C. Medium, presence, proximity, emotional stilling. Effect, subtle resonant spiral in places where unspoken weight is shared. Classification, silent companion to spiral, unintentional grace class. Tess added, this spiral doesn't ask to be understood, it asks to be sat beside. Claire never knew she was leaving spirals behind. or maybe she did, but she didn't need to name them. Because for some bearers, the spiral wasn't something they saw, it was simply how they lived. They called her the Unweaver, not to her face, not in reverence, in relief. Her name was Anais, and she worked with her hands, gardens, fabrics, broken fences, torn paper. She mended things, but not in the way others did. She didn't fix. She freed. No one remembered when the first spiral disappeared after her touch. It may have been at a grief circle, where she knelt beside a woman clinging to a spiral drawn in red thread across her shawl. Anais didn't speak, just laid one hand light, steady, on the fabric. The woman exhaled like the wind had just been let out of her ribs. The spiral unraveled. The thread pulled itself loose, and the woman whispered, "I can hold her now without holding the ache." From that day forward, Anais left trails where spirals had once been. Not erased, released. Only those spirals that were ready. Only those bearers who'd outgrown what they once needed to carry. Sometimes she touched a spiral and it stayed. But sometimes, when the timing was right, when the breath was ready, when the wound had already begun to scar, the spiral let go. Disintegrated, left no residue, only stillness. Jonah met her once, offered her a page in the atlas. She declined, so he wrote instead, "Spiral 280, the spiral that lets go of itself." Witness A. Medium, human presence, ritual untethering. Trigger, consent-based physical acknowledgement. Effect, dissolution of spiral once healing reaches resting state. Atlas, classification, release spiral, terminal echo. Tess added only one line. Not every spiral is meant to be carried forever. Some are just meant to carry you until you can walk without them. After Anais left a town, spirals no longer appeared where she'd touched them, but flowers often did. Soft ones, curled, uncoiling slowly in sunlight. The man who only met spirals in the moment before someone chose to live didn't consider himself a bearer. He called himself a pause. His name was Aaron. He worked odd jobs, sometimes hospice care, sometimes train station janitor, sometimes as nothing at all but a presence near doors people weren't sure they wanted to walk through. He never asked questions. He just showed up, always at the right time, always just before the decision. And the spirals, they appeared in door frames, in steam on cold windows, in the curve of a hand held just long enough to remind someone they were still here. One woman found her spiral in the condensation on a hospital bathroom mirror. She'd been crying, had been ready to disappear quietly without disruption. Then she saw it, looped once, then twice, then again. 3 curls, 1 open edge. She stepped back into the hallway. Aaron was there, mop in hand. He didn't speak, just nodded. She walked past him and never looked back. 2 weeks later, she sent a postcard to the Joy line. "I didn't choose to live because someone convinced me I was strong. I chose to live because someone gave me one more second. The spiral was that second." Jonah read it with trembling hands, logged it. Spiral 281, the spiral of return. Bearer, Aaron J. Medium, human liminality. Trigger, presence in pre-choice silence. Effect, spiral forms at decision boundary, subtle, dissolves upon choice. Atlas classification, threshold spiral, Edgewalker class. Tess wrote in the archive, "This spiral doesn't try to stop the fall, it stands near the edge, and reminds you the wind feels different when you're not alone." Aaron kept no record, no list, no names, but he always carried a handkerchief with one stitched curve, a single spiral, inhale-shaped, unfinished. The last spiral in this arc didn't appear on land. It shimmered in the space between 2 voices, a father and daughter, on opposite ends of a call, each silent for too long. He had forgotten how to say, "I'm sorry." She had forgotten how to say, "I miss you." The call had started with static, mundane phrases, a check-in, "How's the weather? How's the dog?" But beneath it, tension coiled like a wire no one dared cut. And then, he said, "I don't know if I did it right." She paused, breathed, then said, "You tried." Silence. Longer this time, not uncomfortable, sacred. And in that space between words, between two people finally letting each other back in, a spiral formed, not on paper, not in dust, in air, in tone. The call ended. Neither cried, but both went to bed lighter. In two different cities, they both dreamed the same thing, a spiral made of light threads, floating, unspoken, spinning softly in a language only they remembered. Jonah logged it days later after the daughter wrote in, unsure if it counted. He gave it a name. Spiral 282, the spiral between words. Bearers, 2, medium, voice, pause, shared, surrender. Trigger, mutual vulnerability without expectation. Effect, tone spiral. Auditory, liminal imprint. Atlas classification, conversational spiral. Unsigned permission. Tess underlined the final word. Leah closed the archive for the night. Nomi whispered to no one in particular. That one didn't loop. It hovered, and it stayed long enough to be heard. And with that, the spiral finally rested. Not sealed, not finished. Just resting. Because the spiral had never asked for permanence, only for presence.